Hi, I'm McKenna Goodman. I'm moderating tonight's event. I just want to, I'm going to read a little bit from my paper because I want to get everything right, but I just want to thank the 92nd Street Y for hosting this event. And I'm really honored to be here with Kate, Alex, and Leanne, super fun friends and fans of Tove, to discuss her enduring legacy. So Lucas did a lot of background, but I'm just going to give a little bit of a sense. Hi, Marcia. Give a little a sense of her work in the context of kind of how we're going to be discussing her. So for those of you who don't know, Tove Jansson was a Swedish-speaking Finnish writer, visual artist, and illustrator, and she was born in 1914 and spent much of her life on a barren, windswept island in the Gulf of Finland, creating a world that has become one of the most adored in modern literature. And she's considered one of Scandinavia's most beloved writers, and in 1994 was awarded the prize of the Swedish Academy. Tove grew up with artist parents and was a trained visual artist herself, becoming an anti-war cartoonist during World War II. In the 1950s and 60s, she achieved international acclaim and notoriety for her Moomin novels and comic strips, which inspired a cult-like devotion across Europe and around the world about a family of community-minded, troll-like creatures. And I have been told by the Moomin estate that they are not like hippos. So that is a misnomer, even though I think they look a little bit like upright hippos, but they are not hippos. There were these community-minded, troll-like creatures who lived and grappled in a kind of collectivist paradise, which was not without its issues, of course. And as Lucas said, this series inspired films, TV series, and opera, and theme parks in Finland and Japan. And Tove also wrote 11 novels and short story collections for adults, many of which are published in English, but I think not all. And her 1972 masterpiece, the novel The Summer Book, which is one of my favorite books of all time, truly top 5, has long been considered a classic in Scandinavian literature and is widely adored in the US, thanks largely to NYRB's 2008 edition in English. So, as Lucas said, and I'm not going to go over it again, this is a big year for Tove, despite the fact that she died 24 years ago. It's the 80th anniversary of Moomin, and there's all sorts of new publications of her work. And this is a theme. This is not sort of because it's the 80th anniversary. I think the imagination and the appetite for Tove's work is just growing, and we'll talk a little bit about why we think that is tonight. Let's see. Yeah, Tove Jansson. She was a writer of unbelievable range. Ursula K. Le Guin said about her work, "It is prose of the very highest order. It is pure prose. Through its quiet clarity, we see unreachable depths, threatening darkness, promised treasures." Tove was constantly transforming, experimenting, and evolving her art. And even today, over 2 decades after her death, readers continued to be moved deeply by her work and what is known and discussed more and more as a life-affirming philosophical project. She taught us, among so many things, that imaginative storytelling can convey deeply human, inclusive ideas, and that writing a freer world can open up an important door in the collective unconscious. And I believe those words very deeply. So let's start by offering a brief reading of Tove's work just to get her voice in the room. We'll have a discussion, and then we'll have another brief reading, and there'll be time at the end for questions. So start thinking about them now. Thank you.
Are these on? Are these on?
These are on.
They are. Oh, yeah, they are. So I am going to read The Cave from The Summer Book, which I think is one of our favorite pieces in The Summer Book. There was a deep bay on the largest of the nearby islands, and at the far end of this bay, the grass grew right in the sand, short and very green. Grass roots are extremely strong. They twist and tie themselves into a knotted mass that can stand up to the heaviest seas. Great ocean waves roll straight in over the sandy bottom, but once inside the bay, they meet the grass and flatten out. They dig away at the sand. They can do that much, but all that happens to the grass is that it sinks or rises, adjusting to new hills and gullies. A person could walk way out in the water and still feel the grass underfoot. Up toward shore, it grew out of the seaweed, and still farther up, it made a jungle with the spirea and the nettles and the vetch and all the other plants that like salt. This jungle was very thick and tall and lived mostly on dead seaweed and rotten fish. It grew as high as possible, and where it stopped, it was met by sallow rowan and alder branches that bent down as far as they could reach. Walking between them with your arms outstretched was like swimming. Bird cherry and rowan, especially rowan, smell like cat piss when they're in bloom. Sophia made a path through this jungle with a pair of shears. She worked at it patiently whenever she was in the mood, and no one else knew about it. First, the path circled the rose bush, which was large and famous and had a name, Rosa rugosa, when it blossomed with its huge wild roses that could take a storm and fell only when they wanted to. People came from the village to look. Its roots were high, washed clean by the waves, and there was seaweed in its branches. Every 7 years, Rosa rugosa died from salt and exposure, but then her children sprang up in the sand all around, so nothing changed. She had only moved a little. The path led on, through a nasty patch of nettles, through the spirea and the currant bushes and the loose strife under the alder trees, and up to the big bird cherry at the edge of the woods. On the right day and with the right wind, you could lie down under a bird cherry and all the petals would fall at the same time. But you had to watch out for aphids. They held on to the tree if left alone, but if you shook the branches the least little bit, they fell right off. After the bird cherry, there are pine trees and moss, and the hill rises up from the beach. And every time, the cave is just as much of a surprise. It's so sudden. The cave is narrow and smells of rot. The walls are black and damp. And at the far end, there's a natural altar covered with green moss as fine and dense as plush. I know something you don't know, Sophia said. Grandmother put down her murder mystery and waited. Do you know what it is? Asked Sophia sternly. No, Grandmother said. They rowed over to the island in the dory and tied up to a rock. Then they crept around the rose bush. It was a good day for the secret path. Because Grandmother was feeling dizzy and would really rather crawl than walk. These are nettles, she said. I told you that, Sophia said. Crawl faster. It's only a little ways. They came to the spirea and the loosestrife and the bird cherry, and then Sophia turned around and said, Now you can rest a while and smoke a cigarette. But Grandmother had left her matches at home. They lay down under the bird cherry and thought, and Sophia asked what went on an altar. Something elegant and unusual, Grandmother said. Like what? Oh, all sorts of things. Say, really? I don't know right now, Grandmother said. She wasn't feeling well. Maybe a bunch of gold, Sophia suggested, though that's not especially unusual. They crawled on through the pines, and Grandmother threw up in the moss. It could happen to anyone, the child said. Did you take your lupatro? Her grandmother stretched out on the ground and didn't answer. After a while, Sophia whispered, I guess I can spare some time for you today. It was nice and cool under the pine trees, and they weren't in any hurry, so they slept for a while. When they woke up, they crawled on to the cave, but Grandmother was too big to get in. You'll have to tell me what it's like, she said. It's all green, Sophia said, and it smells like rot, and it's very pretty. And way at the back, it's holy, because that's where God lives, in a little box, maybe. Is that so? Said Grandmother, and stuck her head in as far as it would go. And what are those? Small toadstools, Sophia said. But Grandmother could see they were good mushrooms, and she took off her hat and sent her grandchild in to pick them, and they filled it up. Did you say he lived in a little box, she said, and she took out the little sacred box, lupatro, because it was empty now, and Sophia crawled back into the cave and put it on the altar. They followed the path back around Rosa rugosa and dug up one of her children to plant by the guest room steps. The roots came out easily for once, along with a lot of soil, and they packed the whole thing in a Gordon's gin crate that was sticking up out of the seaweed. A little farther on, they found an old Russian cap for the mushrooms so Grandmother could have her hat back. Just look how everything works out, Sophia said. Is there anything else we need? Just say whatever you want. Grandmother said she was thirsty. Good, Sophia said. You wait right here. She walked down the beach until she found a bottle in the sand, underwater. It didn't have any label. They opened it and it fizzed. But it wasn't Vichy water, it was lemonade, which Grandmother much preferred. There, you see, Sophia cried. Everything works out. Now I'm going to find you a new watering can. But Grandmother said she liked the old one fine. Moreover, she had a feeling that they shouldn't press their luck. They rowed home stern first. That sort of rowing is peaceful and pleasant, and it doesn't upset the stomach. It was after 4 o'clock when they got home, and the mushrooms were enough for the whole family. Sorry, that went over 3 minutes.
That's fine.
I love her writing so much.
I know. I lost myself in listening to you. I think I'd like to start by asking just sort of the guiding question for this event, which I think really is a beautiful beginning. What is it about Tove Jansson's work that, I mean, you know, as exhibited in that excerpt, but what is it that is so captivating? Like, what makes us love it so much?
Well, I think the passage that Leanne read, you get such a sense of, and you get this in the Moomins as well, with a sense of there's such collectivity and relation between them. They're all so networked together, but everyone is also so gently isolated and melancholy, right? So there's this idea that the grandmother and Sophia are on this island in many ways alone. They're on each other's consciousness. They're alone in their own bubbles, but they also need each other. They need also the non-human. They need the mushrooms, the cats, like all of this plant life. And they all sort of, I feel like Tove Jansson has this way of writing like this collaboration with the human and the non-human that's also like a ruin. And there's something so melancholy and beautiful about it. This idea of what is it like to live kind of at the end of the world in a way, right? But that they're peacefully coexisting with each other, which I think you get with the Moomins too, that same feeling.
I also think there's a lot of tenderness, and that the stories in general across categories, genres, are created out of a tremendous intimacy. I think of something that I heard Edward P. Jones say a long time ago about his own stories, where he said, I try to know my characters like I know my neighbors, as well as I know my neighbors, which for a lot of us doesn't mean anything now in the United States, but used to really mean something about knowing someone. And I think of that about when I think of her work. I also think she has an economy to her words. Oh, I'm sorry. Wow. Thank you. I was like, why is this man on this pilgrimage? All right, I think there's like a I also think of Natalia Ginsburg.
Yeah.
When I think of her writing, although I feel like Natalia is like saltier, grumpier, funnier. Not that she's not funny, Tove. What did I just call her? Anyway,
Right, that's right.
Okay, and I think but it's a similar economy, you know, like a directness, maybe, a directness.
I think that economy comes from knowing how to draw.
Ah.
I think that, just being able to study the shape of the edge of a leaf or a grass or a cloud. Like, she writes like someone who knows how to paint and draw. And I think that is, I mean, I don't know, it's something that came to me sort of rereading her and then looking at her paintings again. She looks really closely, and you can really hear it.
I think her characters are pretty grumpy, though. Like, even
Grandma's
thinking
grumpy.
Grandma is so grumpy.
She barfs.
Yeah.
And smart. I
Yeah,
think
she's
what
so
Steve
smart.
threw
She's
up.
always sort of like,
I think Natalia
Uncomfortable.
Ginsburg is such a great comparison because there's such a tenderness, but she also allows her characters to be cruel sometimes, to be mean. They have bursts of temper. Even in the Moomins, I'm thinking of Little Mai. Like, Little Mai is such an anarchist. And she there's something about Tova's sensibility. And you get this also, all the temper of the grandmother in the summer book is like every character in Sun City, which is set in a Florida retirement home. And she allows the impatience of aging and the limitations of the body to, she allows that to have a real directness and honesty, just like the limitations of youth. Sophia is so impatient, wants to be older, wants to know how to do things. And then the grandmother, the way that she shows the grandmother's wisdom, but also complete impatience with Sophia is, I mean, I think it feels very specific to her.
Have you guys seen the trailer with the Glenn Close playing the grandmother? There's a movie of
yes,
the
I have seen
summer
it.
house.
Yeah.
I don't know if that, I mean, kind of want her to be like the woman in Hard Truths, the Mike Leigh movie, playing the grandmother. Anyway.
But I think that's the power of her work is that I think it becomes very difficult to translate into film and TV because every one of us as readers becomes so possessive of the text where we're like, she doesn't look like that.
Yeah, and
She doesn't talk like that.
She looks like my grandma.
And Kate, you said that Jansson deliberately didn't draw Sophia or the grandmother in the book.
It's so, and when I realized that and went back, and for Tove, it's because so much of her character of the grandmother was based on her own mother, Ham, and you know, Ham with Sophia, with Tova's niece, and for her the grief of losing her mother was so intense for her. It was so raw. So there's such tremendous feeling in the summer book, but she also allows, I think, rage and impatience. Like, she allows all these feelings in it. It's really so remarkable.
I'm assuming that everybody in here has read the summer book, but also assuming that perhaps, you know, many of you haven't. And it's the novel, I think it's the only novel of Tova's, and I could be mistaken, that has illustrations throughout. I'm not sure if that's true, but, and illustrations throughout, well, that's technically like a diary
not
or memoir.
But yeah.
Yeah, but her own illustrations, right? And so it appeared kind of in like the older, you know, novels for children that have kind of like etchings or pen and ink illustrations sort of populating here and there. And interestingly, I mean, just again, like circling back to like the arc of Tova's career, which is like beginning as a trained visual artist. So that was how she grew up. Both of her parents were artists. She grew up in a bohemian artist studio. She went to art school in Stockholm and in Paris. This was going to be her life, like her parents. And then during the war, along with her mother, which actually I found really interesting, that she and her mother both illustrated anti-fascist cartoons for this Finnish leftist magazine or newspaper, Garm. And then at the close of the war, or like during the war was when the Moomins was sort of born in her imagination, and then as the war ended, that was when Moomin was first published. And it wasn't until the summer book in 1972 that she turned to writing for adults. And the first novel that she wrote for adults had illustrations in it. And so I'm interested, going back to what you said, Leanne, about how she writes like a painter, how she writes like an artist and an illustrator, like what is the like, this is kind of a big question, I don't mean it to be too big, but like the arc of that is so interesting, how one's career kind of develops. I'm curious if we could talk about kind of one bleeding into another.
Maybe it's good to read from more of the excerpts.
Sure.
Before we answer that huge question.
Yeah, that's good. Love it.
Oh, sure, I can read next. I think that, you know, I was interested reading about Tove, and also I don't know if anyone's seen the new Alice in Wonderland that she illustrated, the New York Review of Books. And when you look at them, she really wanted those illustrations to have a feel of horror to them. And like her biggest dream was to illustrate Edgar Allan Poe. So that's another dimension, is how interested she was in horror. And these characters in the nursing home they kind of also take on animal or bird-like qualities. There's like a mouse, there's a bird, but they all kind of are, I want to say grotesque, but they're like tender grotesque, but they all kind of hate each other, but it's very funny and very sad. I'm just going to read a couple minutes. So she goes in and out of all these different characters as they're sitting in rocking chairs on the veranda. On the veranda, Hannah Higgins continued cutting at the egg carton, which she held right in front of her nose, adding lily after lily to the collection in her lap. She mentioned that there were no yellow pipe cleaners this year, so the pistils would have to be green. Out of habit, Mrs. Rubenstein... Wait, this isn't the one I wanted to read. I'll just read this. I'm like, this isn't the section. I'm like, wait. Yes, okay. So many verandas. Okay, I'm going to start again. The rocking chairs were too close together. Only Hannah Higgins was actually rocking. She was always rocking, slowly and peacefully back and forth. She had her scissors and pen and a polystyrene egg carton, and she was very deftly cutting out lilies with deep cups and 4 outspread petals, one after the other. These lilies always stood on the piano at Easter. At Christmas, Mrs. Higgins cut out snowflakes and Christmas stars. It was remarkable how many things could be made from egg cartons. Her nearsighted eyes followed the movements of the scissors very carefully from behind thick glasses. Her broad face was covered with thousands of microscopic wrinkles, as tiny as the wrinkles in crepe paper. She would be 78 in June. Mrs. Morris had noticed that it took a certain amount of attention to keep a rocking chair from rocking. The least motion would set it going. She learned quickly, but every time she arose from the blessed chair, her legs were stiff from suppressed tension. Sometimes she wondered if it was the same for others. When Miss Frey came out of the vestibule, she said, "Hi, everybody, sunshine again." She said this every morning. But today she was tired and said it more sharply than usual. Thoughtlessly, as if she were guided by demons, she made straight for Mrs. Rubenstein. She walked right up to her, and in that tone of voice occasionally used for very small dogs or other people's children, she said, a little letter in the mail." The huge black-eyed woman turned slowly in her chair and looked at Miss Frey, at the worn, painted face beneath the wig, and then she lowered her eyes just as slowly and stared at the letter without taking it. They all knew that now she was going to be obscene again. Miss Frey's hand began to tremble, and finally Mrs. Rubenstein spoke. "My dear Miss Frey," she said with caustic charm, "my own little letter with its own little stamps. Modesty, Miss Frey. Only modesty keeps me from telling you what to do with this letter." And she gave a short, hoarse laugh that indicated clearly where Miss Frey could dispose of the letter. Thompson sat up in his chair. "What did she say?" he said. "Did she say something obscene again?" "Nothing important," Mrs. Morris said. Miss Frey blushed. She gave Mrs. Rubenstein a playful pat on the shoulder and said, "Oh my, how wicked we can be," dropped the letter on the floor and walked away. "What did she say?" Thompson asked again. Through Mrs. Morris's sunglasses, the lawn was blue. The emptiness of the street was like a distant moonscape, and Thompson looked blue and sickly. "Nothing important," she said soothingly. Mrs. Rubenstein was trying to be funny. "But what did she say? What did she say?" Thompson insisted. He got up from his chair and pushed his crooked little features right in her face and screamed that was the way it always was with women. A person never gets to hear anything funny. A person might as well be dead. Dead as a doornail. And that goes for you too, whatever your name is. He stood there waiting with his hand behind his ear, and the whole veranda was absolutely silent. Mrs. Morris took off her glasses, and when the man wasn't blue anymore, he looked comparatively normal. She replied coolly that what Mrs. Rubenstein had meant, presumably, was that Miss Frey could use the letter in question for toilet paper. Thompson listened carefully and then sat back down in his rocking chair. Very funny, he said, and turned his gaze out toward the street. Ladies, you are irresistibly hilarious.
So that is like so many gem-like visual moments, ranging from the wig and the painted face to like seeing everything through the sunglasses to the lilies.
The pistols, the pipe cleaner color.
But it is also very tender. Like, she will turn from being quite, it reminds me, like, the book that this reminds me of a lot is Jane Bowles' Two Serious Ladies.
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
Reminded me of Magic Mountain, too. A little.
Yes, it has that quality. It's like parody, but also it's satire and parody. The gaze is quite critical, but then it can be quite tender. And there's these devastating moments when you're in a character's interiority and their memory falters, their body falters, they feel alone in their room, and it's just devastating. So it's all these tonal registers.
And salty, as you pointed out, yes.
It's very salty.
And I think the sort of it feels very smooth in the way that it moves around the scene as well, right? Like she's in complete control over what she's showing us and where she's taking us.
I have this little quote of hers, actually, that speaks directly to that. She, speaking about her own style, Tove Jansson said, and I quote, "Nothing must be superfluous, and that one must hold the story enclosed within one's hand." And I think, I wonder about, like, talking about Tove as a stylist. Like, so much, you saying, like, writing like she paints. I also think she writes like a naturalist. Just back to the excerpt that you read in the summer book, just like naming all the plants, and the way that like Rosa rugosa, from a botanical perspective, like the way that wild rose functions, which is, depending on what kind of gardener you are, you either like can't stand Rosa rugosa because she's such a salty, well, she can withstand salt, she can withstand storm, she can handle anything, but she's not like a rose with a capital R, so to speak. And I feel like she writes her plants as characters, and I wonder about that too. You have these people who are at a retirement home in Florida. She wrote about them she wrote that novel while she was traveling in the U.S., while she was in Florida. And then the summer book, I don't know if this is actually true. She finished it in New Orleans, actually, while she was on that same trip, a place that she said was incredibly inclusive and free-spirited, and she absolutely loved New Orleans. Interesting to write so deftly about a place when you're in another place. That's pretty dissimilar. But, like, the way that she kind of collects material, conversation, observation, does that resonate with you all in literature today? I mean, we're reading her work, really we're reading in the past. Does that feel like, you said Natalia Ginsburg, people have compared her to Proust. Can we talk more about who you might see her in conversation with today, writers working today?
Yeah, I mean, when I was looking at her paintings recently, I thought, oh, she's a direct descendant of the Bloomsbury group because of their relationship to, literature, painting and drawing, illustration, and also just sort of homosexuality and how she lived. And so that was my first thought in terms of kind of that.
I mean, I think her work is much more visual and in many ways sensual than a lot of what is being written now. And I think it's because she's unafraid to describe people. And I do think that a lot of what I see, especially with my students, is a fear of describing people. Like characters without discernible appearances. So it's like a relief to just be among like some people that I can look at in a story. But and on a side note, someday I will write about this theory I have that satire only really succeeds if it also is very sincere, to that point. But
I think I agree with that. Well, it's also, if you look at the summer book, nothing really happens. I mean, it's a period of time. It's about duration. It is, I think, about gentrification, the island changing. It's about grief. It's about this relationship. But I think there's not much patience, unfortunately, or championing of texts, which are so much about atmosphere and so much about texture. And so I think that's what, I think the scarcity is not because of lack of desire. I mean, I think the kind of books that Daniel Dutton is publishing at Dorothy, like writers like Jen George or Amina Kane, have that slowness to them. Well, Jen George can be very actually fast and antic, but have that sense of it's just about texture and atmosphere and taking up these characters. But I think in America, in the States, literature like that tends not to be
Saleable.
as championed because it's not seen as plot oriented.
I was just thinking of Raven Leilani. That's who I think of when I think of like who is a painter also. Like her books are wonderfully physical, expressive, sensual, or her book rather. We're still waiting for a second book from her. But I don't know, for whatever reason, we're in the grip of a wave of what Brandon Taylor called character vapor.
I think he was writing about me when he wrote that, actually.
Oh, really?
Really?
Sorry.
I love the idea of vapor, though. I feel like summer book is very vapory. Like when he wrote that, I was like, yes, vapor. So I think he was writing partially about dress, when he wrote that.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I didn't take it as an affront. But I think, but I think, there isn't really realism in Tove Jansson, right? Like it is specific. She does have this real sense of writing character and how they feel, but there's also this like really surreal quality. Like even reading that, I think of like Leonora Carrington, or like these surrealist writers where something violent could suddenly happen, something sudden could suddenly happen. But I don't know if she really follows like realism in terms of the logic of most of her work.
I think what I'm thinking of is maybe like backstage we were talking about how she's not exactly self-taught, but kind of operating on
Writing or
as an author, yeah. And it strikes me that there is a deep influence from cartooning, which is that cartoonists have to create characters on the page who are also symbols, who are also like visual puns, and I feel like that's
she
kind of
knew
what
them
we're
so
seeing
well. Like she knew
in
the
prose.
Moomins so well.
Yeah,
she
we're
would
seeing it
draw
in
them
prose.
over and over.
Plus, she got all of her character studying done with the Moomins. Like she knew how to sort of really, both in line and in both verbally and visually, capture a character over and over and over again in her strips and in those books. But this is another thing that, to your first question, Alex said the economy of the writing, but something I love about her was that her and her mother were the breadwinners and had to earn money and had to understand the market. And as illustrators do in a different way than sometimes fine artists do. And that I see throughout her later work, and she said she wanted to be known as a painter first, but it's sort of all of the necessity and the economic necessity that she had to do, and also, they only have, her palette's so weird in the movement, like it's so, but that is down to kind of the newspaper having only 2 color inks, and
Right.
so she just had a real sense of delivery, and thus I think that influenced how she wrote later, because she knew how to be efficient because of her economic, know-how, and just, I don't know, her father sounds so crazy, and
Right. I mean, we should, I'd love to talk about the Moomins for a second, unless, did you want to say something to that?
I want another excerpt.
Another excerpt. Also, I realize, 92nd Street white people, that I am not wearing a watch, nor did I bring my phone, and
Someone
I have
will
no
come up
concept
here.
of time. So,
Right, I'm worried we're gonna.
and I can't see
I
anything.
want to read this
so-
before we run
Okay.
out of time.
Yes,
but
please.
is anybody
Yeah.
else? Are you reading?
No,
Oh,
no.
okay.
No, your turn,
no.
Alex.
All right.
Yeah.
How much time do we have? Oh, here.
Just keep going.
Okay.
Keep going.
'cause
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I want to talk about
All right. So, notes from an island, just out, in this beautiful edition that McKenna put together and that I wrote an introduction for, is the story of the island refuge that she and her lover Tutti built on this little island called.
Clove Haran.
Thank you. I was like, I don't know how to. I've never heard it said out loud. Thank
Called a
you.
rock in the middle of nowhere, not one tree. It was literally a rock in the middle of the ocean. And they moved there in their 50s, which I just sort of, chopping wood and in their crazy boat.
So, as I also am in my 50s, incredibly inspiring to read about.
True.
So I'm going to read this excerpt from an essay that you thoughtfully included at the end, which is not.
We can give credit to the UK publisher.
Okay. Okay.
We're their partner.
Um,
Thank you, sort
that
of.
you
but
both thoughtfully included
We
at the
love
end, which is called The Island. So Notes from an Island is followed by The Island. All right. It's a joy to carry heavy stones. Is it? To wrestle a log out of the shallows using leverage and muscle power to maneuver the boat around the point against a strong southwesterly. The water is still ice cold, the ground hard, and light grows stronger every day. You know that warmth and paradise are there within reach, and every year you forget that happiness is an anticipation, not fulfillment. But summer keeps its promise and then passes. September becomes October, and the island is once again listless and indifferent. The last herring boats sail by into the night, and their lights vanish out to sea. There is a new silence without birds. The colors are heavy, and the island is trampled and tired. It develops a hostile but fascinating face. Fear of the dark drives you out of the cabin with its 3 black windows and into the shed where nets are stored, a secure, practical space that will never surrender you to danger. The danger arrives with autumn storms, the real storms that don't die down at sunset, that can hold the island locked in for 10 days, that alter the shoreline and set the cabin vibrating. And the peculiar noises, strongest inside the cabin, but audible in the net shed too, on the 4th day of the storm, ragged tonal fragments like electronic music, laughing voices and cries and distant bells, the hard sound of feet running around the house. They don't matter as long as you turn all the mirrors to the wall in time and check the blanket hung across the window. When the sun has gone down and a menacing violet light flows over the island, you have to convince yourself that nothing can peer into the net shed. There mustn't be a single crack. And you have to fill the lamp every evening, for it mustn't go out. You can't afford to get frightened in October. The fear of being afraid, not of people, but of what seems human but isn't. The morning is transparent and uncaring. New banks of seaweed are heaped up on the lee shore. The island dries and shrinks and tries to shake you off. Everything is parched, moldy, lifeless. The flotsam carried ashore by the storm doesn't linger, but is washed impatiently back out to sea. The land is peeled bare by the winds, and spume blows over the windows and makes them blind. The water rises. Everything you've built and collected must be carried higher, every day higher still. You get the feeling that your paradise is sinking into the sea, and you have a strange desire to go with it. Everything around you gives itself up either to death or to survival. One day, just before twilight, a curtain of rain comes across the water. For a few hours, the colors are bright and vivid again. The landscape pulls itself together and looks rich. Then it lets go, and the land is no longer alive, just waterlogged. Everything swells up like the sea surging around the headland. Doors and windows can't be opened, and all that's beautifully brown and withered becomes a wet clot. The island is dead, but still far from properly buried. The last of the summer birds, the city people, flee, flapping off in alarm. I fled myself one night when the wind shifted and the storm suddenly abated. My food and my firewood were gone. There was only the wind. That last day I lay on the floor and saw pictures in the knotholes in the ceiling. All my things had been packed and ready by the door for a week, and the room was empty, the curtains taken down. Then something black and swift swept past my windows. Birds with long pointed wings flew around the cabin, close to the walls, over and over and over again. Deep in the idiotic fantasies of solitude, I was convinced that mysterious harbingers of doom were drawing a circle of destruction around the house. The wind shifted that night. The sudden quiet woke me. Because the empty house was surrounded by catastrophe, I forgot my fear of the dark, flung open the door, and ran out. Ran and stumbled. The island at night was an alien place. Threw my baggage into the boat, up at the cabin. The lamp shone all alone on the slope, so much fainter than the self-confident lighthouses along the horizon, and closed the cabin, wrestling to turn the key, which hadn't been used for so long and didn't want to work, my light turning the juniper bushes into monsters. A new breeze began softly blowing out from on the dark water. And I ran to the shore, stumbled and ran, felt how the island hated me, wanted to be rid of me, tried to push me out of the boat, which was too heavily loaded, wept and swore and pushed, and then it slid free, and I got out the oars. On the water, the darkness was not dangerous, and I was ashamed. You summer wretch, I thought. You think you love your island, but you have never endured a winter together. You're a summer bird, a sunbather, a parasite feeding on cheap solitude. You play at being primitive and picturesque. You're a pathetic city dweller. Here, everything was black. A new wind was rising out at sea. I heard it coming, as if it were walking on the water, but not yet disturbing it. I rode on instinct. Somewhere up ahead was the safety of the mainland, with its sleeping houses, and farther in, its brightly lit city, where I live, where I belong, all winter. Suddenly I stopped rowing in the middle of the bay, and for the very first time that winter, in mid-flight, I began to yearn uncontrollably for my island.
Oh.
It strikes
That's the horror.
It strikes me listening to Alex that writers who I think who are living now and writing now who are kindred to Tove in a way are Anne Carson and Lydia Davis, especially how much their work deals with weather. I always think of Anne Carson and snow and this idea of landscape affecting so much of her work, or like Lydia Davis's The Cows, or like how she writes weather or how she writes wind. You know, have you seen the collage that Tove kept on her studio door of all the different storm clouds?
No.
It's on the Moomins website. It's really beautiful. Yeah, you would find it really interesting. But she was so interested in writing. I mean, storms are throughout the Moomins.
When a writer can properly put a figure in the scale of nature, I feel like that affects any reader, because we do know, whether we sort of walk around with that proportion or not, or that scale, us in proportion to nature is always true. Like, it's always, correct to some degree, like whether, and I feel like, again, Carson's Canadian, and it has that, incredible sense of, there's parts of the country where you can't survive or live.
And she's always yearning for the sublime, I feel, in
Yeah.
Carson. And I feel there's so many different registers, but what Alex was reading feels like yearning for the sublime.
And honesty about the fact that she wasn't there full time. I mean,
Yeah.
you compare to Thoreau, who, that didn't come up when writing Walden, that mother was bringing
I know.
the
laundry.
taking
Laundry.
laundry, bringing
Yeah.
bringing him lunch, so that he could experience the glories of man and nature.
Yeah.
I mean, here she is, completely laying that bare, in a way of like, she has not only nothing to hide.
Yeah, the lack of
but
vanity.
Exactly, the lack of vanity and the ability to say, like, not only am I in love with the island, but I am unworthy.
Yeah.
And also, so what? And the honesty of that, and how, and spoiler alert, but, at the end of this book, which is really her only, like, besides her letters, her only nonfiction about her, well, I guess she wrote the memoir, The Sculptor's Daughter, that was her first, but about the island. And one could even call this the diary that informed the summer book, or that she was writing while writing the summer book. So for fans of the summer book, it'll be especially interesting. But lost my train of thought. We were talking about, at the end,
Nonfiction.
she and Tootie. So first of all, she lived with her longtime partner for 45 years. They went every summer. Well, they were together for 45 years. And for 30 years, they would go every summer to this island. Many of those years, it was illegal for them to be in a relationship in Finland until, 1971 or something. And, I mean, the island was where they could be free together, first of all, despite how crazy the conditions were. I mean, she writes about the storms battering this cabin, or they'd be out in a tent just being battered by, the storms of the open sea. But at the end, they leave the island and they realize they're too old, and it's that Tove becomes afraid of the ocean, the thing that she loved the most, and she writes about that. That she could talk about that she became afraid of the thing that sustained her. I mean, when you think about Sun City and aging and writing about aging, it's just an interesting thing, to the honesty about whatever the end is, or whatever the last phase or the next phase, or anyway, that was not really a comment. I mean, that was more of a comment than a question, but it brings me back to the Moomins.
It's a good way.
But no, going back to the Moomins about, she was creating this paradise of collectivism and inclusivity and freedom and, a space where everyone could be safe and part of family at a time post-war where there was a desperate need for a reimagination of society. And it's just, that's so rich. Is there, when you think about the importance of children's literature, especially at that time. And you've written for children. Ish. I mean, haven't you published a children's book?
One.
Doesn't count.
It's a lot. But I'm actually curious. Maybe no one identifies as a children's author, but do you? I mean, I don't know here. But children's literature, what is the value of that, especially politically?
It's huge. Yeah. I mean, if you can write for children, you can write anything. I mean, it's the hardest form, I think. And there's a real, there's not quite an understanding of how hard it is to not be didactic, to not be, all finger wagging, and to be truly weird. And for those books that last are the weirder ones, and Goodnight Moon and Mush, but I don't know.
Moomin's pretty weird.
It's weird.
Well, in the green room before, Leanne, you brought up Miyazaki, and I think there is this idea in some children's literature or films about needing that space for a political imagination. In the Moomins, much like in Miyazaki, there's so many natural disasters. And there's often other forms of like family crisis, moving, being orphaned, and same within the Moomins. I mean, there's migration, there's great floods that occur throughout. So it's a little
comets coming
Yeah.
to crash Earth.
So
into
just
bits.
like the inevitability of not getting along
right.
with
Sure,
the
yeah.
people closest to you or
Absolutely.
your neighbors, or
Yeah.
just that sort of like you will not see eye to eye with
And managing it.
and managing it.
Right.
and like maybe approaching the other and saying, come with. You're invited in. Like Moomin Mama is the Moomin troll's mother, Moomin Mama. And Moomin Mama is always like fixing things, like, it'll be okay. Come in. Take shelter from the
Guests,
storm,
yeah.
whoever you
Right.
are, whatever creature you are, you know.
But it's utopia, but through so much like losing of homes, migration. So and I think children's literature or children's cinema that addresses these big, huge things does it in a way that adult literature doesn't, because it is about a political imagination.
Why? Like, is it because we've lost that sense of like unfiltered? I mean, there's something unfiltered about Tove.
Wait, what is the why?
Well, like
Like,
okay,
why does she
what is
do
the
it, or-
mechanism? No, like, what is the mechanism?
Curiosity.
Yeah.
There's so much curiosity, and there's so much sense of, I mean, there's not that much magic in the Moomins, but there's like a sense of magic and a sense of like joy.
There's also, I mean, she really remembers what it's like to be a child. You can tell that in her adult prose, but I think all of the best, well, I was talking about this recently with John Klassen and Emily Greenhouse. A lot of the best children's book authors don't have children and lead kind of very weird lives, but they remember what it was like to be 7, to be 10, to the fear of losing your parents, the joy of losing your parents, like all of that. There's just and the fact that she could, I mean, and in all of the, as you said, the Moomin started as a political character, and so when I read it now, again, I didn't read it as a child. I think in Canada we had Tommy Ungerer, but we didn't have Tove Jansson. Like it's so funny kind of what filters
I
down.
didn't read it either. As a
We
kid.
had
Yeah,
Pippi
it's-
Longstocking.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, Pippi,
I was
yeah.
thinking about Astrid Lindgren.
But I didn't come to it as a child, and when I read it now, I go,
Tintin.
it's Charles Schultz. It's the best kind of children's literature in that it's great for adults too. Like it doesn't. It's hysterical when you read it as an adult. Same Peanuts is the same. I mean, there's just so much.
existential,
Yeah.
so philosophical.
She doesn't patronize Sophia in the summer book at all. There's nothing
yeah.
cloying about, so there's no. Sophia has an inward fury, a sense of jealousy, and a sense of like curiosity and beauty that Tove maybe like that really takes seriously.
Yeah.
Like, so
Right.
there's no condescension there.
As a 6-year-old is the hero, in the same way that the grandmother is the central mind. Yeah, so true.
I'm having a memory that Anne Carson paints volcanoes.
I
Yes.
had no idea.
I think
The cover of Autobiography of Red is a volcano
that's her
she
painting.
And
painted.
that's her painting.
I think so,
Oh wow.
which makes her one of
this
those
is what you
writers.
should just teach your students how to draw.
Well, I used to teach the graphic novel.
Yes.
When I teach the summer book, I usually have them draw. Like even to draw a tree and to not do it well, but to just pay attention to it. Because there is such a sense of paying attention.
Right. I think I remember figuring out when I was researching my second novel, The Queen of the Night, that I could take notes by drawing something because it was an intense form of looking at it that was required.
Where did the
Even if the
drawings
drawing,
go?
I mean, they're kind of terrible, but that's
Oh, we want
they're in my notebooks. But the important thing is that I did them, right? Like so, and they helped. I have much better drawings than those drawings, but thank you.
One of the things we haven't talked about Tove yet was her life as a correspondent. Letters is a big deal in her work. Moomin became such a humongous sensation that she was getting 2,000 fan letters a year, and she responded dutifully to every single one. She had a feeling of duty, and it infuriated her. There was such inane. I mean, there was some great fan letters, I'm sure, but then there was some really inane ones like, "I am making Moomin pot holders. Like, is that okay with you? Or would you be okay with a 6% cut?" I mean, just like things. And she would respond like, "Please don't do that," or whatever she would say. And she became so exhausted by this correspondence that she eventually turned away from the Moomins and turned it over to her brother. Yeah, and then her brother carried it on, and that's when she wrote the summer book, and she moved away. And then the commercialization of the Moomins, I mean, just super merchandise. And she became very just like overwhelmed. And we'll move into Q&A, but I just wanted to ask about correspondence, and is that even possible now? Do you think, or is it purposeful? Do you have to be like, I'm corresponding? Does an email count as a correspondence?
Yes, of course it does.
Even before you're dead?
I feel like I wouldn't be a writer if I wasn't in conversation with others. Like, so much of being a writer or a thinker is being in relationship with other people. I mean, all my books come out of correspondence mostly. Yeah.
Right. And do you feel like there's a muscle that you kind of have to exercise to move from like just emailing or texting into a correspondence writing? Or
I feel like that, a notebook in a way is a correspondence as well, right? You have this sense of
With your future self.
yeah, with some space that you are writing, you have an address. So I think that it's I think so much of work is about having who you are addressing it to. But yeah, I mean, it's not the same as like a long letter by hand. Yeah.
I mean, I've thought about the ways that I think letters from, before email are different. And I think there was more of an effort then, especially before cell phones, to kind of draw a circle around the moment you were writing the letter from, to fill the recipient in about like where you were, what it was like, what the weather was like, what the
And you had to wait.
scenes were like. Right, and you were trying to bring them into the space, and then you sent it to them physically. I mean, there's some people that you read their letters from the past, and they do seem a lot like emails I get now, just very kind of all business and but my favorite ones are like the kind that I just described, I think. I think writing back to people who write you as a writer is one of those, I do feel an obligation to respond to everyone.
Really?
Yeah.
Feel
It's a kind of like,
you guys don't?
I'm terrible.
No response?
No. I don't, yeah. How do they...
Tova would probably say, good.
How do
Focus
they
on
get a
your
hold
art.
of you?
through my website.
Your website.
Yeah.
Right.
And I have one reader who he and I have corresponded for a while now. And it's always a little precarious because he was diagnosed with some kind of, and maybe he's just lying, but he could die at any minute. It's really like, it's some kind of illness.
I'd be laughing. I know.
Sorry,
It's so really sad.
Just because he said he might be lying.
Right,
That was funny.
Yeah.
So,
Not that he's
I'm
gonna
laughing
die.
too.
That's not funny.
right, it's definitely
He's
not
not
funny at all, except if he's lying.
Yeah.
In which case
Then
it
that's
is.
funny.
It is
Yeah.
Right, but I mean that in the sense that, like, it seems, I do believe him, but I realize that, like, unless I ask him, if I have had the feeling lately of wanting to write to him and say, like, is there some way that someone could let me know if you do die, so that it's not just a mystery, to me. But I don't know, maybe that's a boundary he needs, He's a gay man, mixed Korean like myself, born earlier than me. And so he's been telling me stories about growing up in Texas and what that was like, and I've learned a lot from him. And my work means my work is like something he never thought anybody would ever do or find. So I'm like his he's said to me like how much it matters that I exist and I'm writing, and that has been a really powerful motivation, to keep working at times when I might feel lazy or, I'm like, oh, Ben needs this.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So
Some of my best friendships have come out of cold correspondence, which is
Yeah, for sure.
Too, actually, yeah, with other writers too. We're going to move into questions. I just want to say quickly, just to wrap up, I think Notes from an Island is actually a correspondence between Tove and Tootie, and I didn't realize that until just now. So Tootie, her longtime partner, has paintings in the book, and it's the first time that, besides being too ticky in Moomin, that her work is astride Tova's work about the island that they shared. And I just realized they're yes, they
a Moomin character as well.
Character. I just realized that. That's really interesting. I mean, not formally correspondence, but let's have some questions. Anyone? You can just raise your hand and say it. There's no question.
And we'll repeat it into the mic.
Yeah.
Are there any videos of her
Of
is the
Tove.
question.
You answer.
Didn't her brothers say that he never could capture her in a photograph? That like all the photographs of her, he can't really.
I feel like I saw a documentary,
Yeah, I think
though, that does exist. That you. Hi.
Oh, welcome. Hello.
Thank you for being here.
I've searched and haven't been able to find anything that hasn't been just without sound or snippets, but they're probably, maybe they haven't released it yet, or
Maybe it isn't licensed to be.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Maybe not in the U.S. or. Oh, you saw it here. You saw it in Sweden.
Yeah.
Okay. What would the title be translated in English?
If I get your name or something, I can check when I get home. I'm back home
Cool.
after tomorrow.
Okay. Great. Wonderful.
Thank you. On behalf of all of us.
Thinking of this book, the Notes on an Island, I was thinking of Claude Cahun and Marcel Moore, how they lived together on the island of Jersey, and people always think of Claude Cahun, like kind of gender bending performance artist and photographer, and they always think of Claude Cahun in isolation, but it was really Marcel Moore who took the photographs. So to think of this as bringing back this idea of what was probably a very fruitful collaboration between them.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I haven't actually, I don't know what that collaboration was like about that book. I don't know, why they decided to do this together.
She was probably her reader, though.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Oh, and yeah.
Claude Cahun.
Oh, Claude Cahun and Marcel Moore. Claude.
Yeah.
She's
Chaoun.
Yeah, she's sometimes I don't know what Claude's pronoun would be now. Very gender bending artist. Sometimes affiliated with the Surrealists, but really, but yeah, did all of these stagings of themselves in these various genders and theatrical garbs.
Didn't they do protests?
So they lived together on the island of Jersey, and so there were German soldiers stationed, and they listened to the radio, and Marcel Moore translated it, and then Claude Cahun wrote poems, and they slipped all of these satirical poems in Nazi soldiers' pockets. They did this 2-person campaign against them, and they went to prison for a long time. I mean, Claude Cahun almost died in prison, but they were really these great protesters against fascists. But it's a interesting link. Yeah, yeah.
Do you think of Tove and Tootie, do you think of them as anti-fascist? I mean,
yeah.
would you categorize Tove as
I think
that?
she always said she was anti-fascist. And her, a lot of her, her father sort of comes across as very anti-Semitic, but a lot of her friends were Jewish, and she just sort of turned on that. And,
there was a big rift in their relationship because he was a supporter of the Nazis.
Well, because of the Winter War, right? And I googled. So.
But one of her constant companions, who was the man, I forget his name, but he was not a resistance member, but he was in the opposite party in Finland in the 40s.
It was quite
and
brave of
50s.
Tove to be signing her, anti-Stalin, anti-Hitler, like deeply mocking political cartoons with her name.
I know, yeah.
And then a little figure that's the precursor to Moomin Troll, which she called Snork, peering around from her signature. I mean, that's the root of the Moomins, which isn't. I mean, it's pretty cool, pretty interesting
That
to
is
think
great.
about. Are there any other questions? Yes. Thank
Tove
you.
Jansson.
Tove.
My mother's Swedish, and I grew up with living through these books. And then I read all of them to my own children, and my son, who is 20, going on 27, says that it gave him permission to be a gay man comfortable in his own skin, because these characters allow for gender, orientation, identity, acceptance, and also fluidity in relationships. The relationship that Moomin Troll has with Snufkin, and the way that Snufkin comes and goes with the spring, and the way that their love for each other is genuine and legitimate, but also loose, that there's a kind of independence built into that relationship, is something that both of my children have really connected with. And I'm now reading to my granddaughter, and watching my Swedish mother read Moomin to my...
No, I can hear you.
having my Swedish mother read the Moomin stories in Swedish to my 2-year-old granddaughter is an extraordinary thing, and it feels like the politics of the Moomin Trolls. We're all teachers, we're all academics, we're all professors, and I think the politics of it has become, it's our politics. The politics of those books have become the politics of our family. I would also love to add that I think Sigrid Nunez and Rachel
Oh, yeah.
Rachel Carson, to go back earlier, but then also to The Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, that there are sections about storms and beaches, and some of the passages that you read that remind me quite a lot of those. But Sigrid Nunez, both The Vulnerables and The Friend, there are moments of observation and closeness that resemble very much some of the Tove Jansson writing, I think. And finally, Astrid Lindgren, the books that are popular in America are the ones that have closure, the ones that have happy endings where everybody's okay at the end. But the ones that are most wonderful are the brothers Lionheart and Mio, My Son, where there are a few things that get resolved, but really, truly terrible things do not. And I think children, as Bruno Bettelheim wisely said a long time ago, require mess in order to encounter mess. And Astrid Lindgren is like, the two of them are sort of soul sisters in that way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Was there another hand here? Or yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I was looking at the drawings in the summer house. It's like she can draw air. Like, you look at her skies, and she can draw air and she can describe air. The sort of, I think I did a word search on hazy or haze, or this yellow haze. I mean, she writes yellow haze. We all know exactly what that is. Doesn't exist, but we know exactly what that is. And then her drawing of the atmosphere and of the clouds, every single little line, it's just a hatch. It's just this, like it's both. I think it comes from the same place of observation and just quiet. Patience is just one of the things I admire most in any artist, and she's got that both in her writing and in her drawing. Yeah.
I'll never forget that phrase of hers about the wind coming as if it's the new wind coming as if it's walking across the water.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I love what you said about seeing with her heart. I think that's
Yeah.
really perfectly right.
That's another thing that, with all the children stuff, it's sort of like children are born with a complete suspension of disbelief, and then as adults, we just don't want that anymore. We don't value it. So when it comes in art, a suspension of disbelief, whether it's in a cartoon or in prose or in a story, it's so magic. Like, it just is great. Yeah.
Well, do you want?
No, I
I
think
think we're out.
got the
of
signal,
time.
yeah.
We got the signal. We got the wrap up signal.
This was fun.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.